So the first thing I did when my air conditioner was not working is make sure the little green light right here on the AC button was coming on when I press it. That means that the main 10 amp AC fuse that's under the steering wheel is properly functioning and it's not damaged or anything. The next thing I did is verify if power was reaching the compressor, and it indeed was. When the button was activated and the car was running, I was getting the 12 to 14 volts at the little pin. I measured 14 volts, but we call it 12 volt nominal or whatever. So in any case, there's power reaching it, and what happens when power reaches the compressor is that something called a field coil is energized. It's this little ring that surrounds the output shaft of the AC compressor, and when that electromagnet field coil is activated, it energizes and it pulls in the clutch plate, and that's the characteristic clicking or like snapping on noise you hear from an AC compressor, which I was not getting, is that thing activating. So what I did is I then checked the resistance of the coil, and I found 5 ohms. The proper specification is 3 to 5 ohms, and I was at 5 ohms, which is within the correct specification. That made me know that the field coil was working properly. Another thing you can do is measure the current through the field coil, but measuring the resistance is a little bit easier. All you do is take the input pin to the field coil. The resistance in the wires is negligible, so you take that input pin and measure resistance between that and a ground point, which I use just the body of the alternator or the body of the compressor. You can just check your grounds are continuous beforehand, and I measure that resistance. The next thing I did was measure the air gap for the clutch compressor. And now the air gap is the space between the pulley and the clutch plate. So what the clutch plate is, it's a little plate that's on the outer side of the pulley, and that one is pulled in when the field coil is activated. And what the field coil is that little ring that I described earlier that it's that little electromagnet. And that electromagnet, when it's energized, it creates a field, a magnetic field, which pulls in the clutch plate and latches it against the pulley. And the pulley has a bit of friction material similar to a clutch that's adhered to it. And the clutch plate is more like a flywheel. So it latches the two together. You hear the characteristic click, and the AC compressor shaft itself, the input to the compressor, now spins with the pulley which has provided energy from the engine. So what I did to measure the air gap is take a bunch of feeler gauges, and the gap is supposed to be between 13 and 23 thousandths of an inch. Mine measured in at 28 thousandths of an inch, which is 5 thousandths of an inch bigger than the specification. And then what I did is decided to adjust the shim washers, which I will be talking about subsequently. And again, the air gap is the space between those two items, and it's pretty easy to see, and I'll be showing it to you shortly. If you watch the whole video, you'll see the air gap open and close as the clutch plate is activated. The AC compressor clutch plate from the 2003 Corolla, and this is the little washer that goes in there, and that's what spaces it out to give it the correct air gap. In the service manual, here there's up to 3 washers. I only found 1. I'll inspect more closely and see if I find more, but yeah, that's what I actually found. And here's the kind of flywheel surface here. I tried prying this off by prying at the air gap itself. That's this gap between here and the pulley is considered the air gap. But in reality, what works is to pry this gap here. And what this is 2 separate plates, and then this is a rubber material like on a crank pulley, so to allow a dampening effect. So this rubber isolates the 2 sections, and this outer ring is attached to the clutch surface, this ring here. And then this inner portion right here is actually separate. The inner portion is separate, and that's what goes into the compressor, and it's attached via this rubber dampening portion. So if you pry at this gap here where the 2 are stamped together along these rivets, 1 in each corner, you can evenly distribute the force and pry it forward and get it off, and not jack up the surface for your clutch material on the pulley or this flywheel type thing. So yeah, this is where you pry at this gap between the 2 sections, and it comes off quite easily. And the U-joint and the extension and the 10mm socket that we use to get into this little gap and take it off. As you can see here, a lot of the clutch material is this brown band right here. It's taken a lot of fucking damage because of me shoving the goddamn screwdriver up in there to pry it out. And there's some nasty gouging, but hey, I'm gonna see if it still fucking works. I'm just gonna chance it. I really should not have pried in the air gap, I kind of intended to pry just in this region just before the clutch material starts and gently work it out. What worked is to pry on the pulley itself. There's a little gap where the two sections are riveted together, as I showed in the other video. That's what really fucking worked. But yeah, that's it. And this is the 2003 Corolla. You can unhook it and unplug it a few times.
A few times?
Yeah, go ahead. Let go.
That means unhook it.
Yeah.